Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the season finale of season 1 of Hot Mess Life Coach. I'm so excited to have you here, and I'm so glad you guys are able to join me or watch this from the future or listen to it on the podcast. I'm your host, Brian Hogan, both a hot mess and a life coach, and this is the show for people trying to get it together while the world seems to be falling apart. And what I'd like to talk to all of you about today as we head into the holidays is avoidance and the void that is caused by avoidance. Because if you're anything like me, you probably have aspects of the holidays you want to avoid, or triggers, or memories, or random things that come up at the holiday time that make you a little more sensitive, a little more tender, or a little more raw. And so I want to share some strategies with you for how to embrace rather than avoid that which may be causing your suffering, because avoidance actually will amplify that suffering. So when we avoid pain, problems, confronting others, or speaking up for ourselves, we actually create a void inside of us at the same time. And that's a void where our integrity should live. And by integrity, I don't mean you're always perfect and you never lie and you always do the right thing. I mean, that's part of it. But what I mean by integrity is that you're living in alignment with your true nature, that what you say and do is aligned with what your heart, mind, soul, body, and spirit want to say and do. That's what it means to live in integrity. As Martha Beck explains in her book, The Way of Integrity, integrity comes from the word integer, which is one thing, whole and undivided. So to be in your integrity means to be whole and undivided. And when we're in a stance of avoidance of any kind, we're in a stance of dividing ourselves, because we're dividing ourselves away from something we actually feel, something we're trying to avoid. So broadly defined, avoidance means to keep away from or stop oneself from doing something. At face value, this doesn't appear to be that big of a deal. You probably avoid stuff every day. I do. That doesn't necessarily mean you're violating your integrity, but it's when you're avoiding uncomfortable feelings that could help you heal that you're splitting off from your integrity. And we all do this. It's not a bad thing. It's not a judgment. It's a clinical thing. I'm talking mechanically here. We divide from our integrity. I'm not talking judgmentally. So, for example, I might avoid the cookie aisle at the grocery store. I definitely do. I do avoid the cookie aisle at the grocery store. So I'm not tempted to buy cookies. Sometimes I'll avoid taking I-95 home from work so that I'm not stuck in traffic. Or sometimes I'll avoid walking through the main door at work, and I'll go in the side door instead because I don't want to make small talk that day or right then in the morning. So those are examples of avoidance, but let's take a minute and look at what's really happening there. So in these examples, let's identify what I'm avoiding. So am I avoiding people and places and cookies and traffic? I mean, yeah, technically yes. But the real reason why I'm avoiding these unpleasant specific people, places, cookies, and highways comes from a desire to avoid the unpleasant experiences and feelings I associate with traffic, cookies, and small talk. So I'm not really trying to avoid traffic, cookies, and small talk. I'm trying to avoid feelings of frustration, awkwardness, or feelings of guilt from eating too many cookies. So it's really the feeling states that we're trying to avoid. Avoidance, when it is unhealthy, is about avoiding uncomfortable feelings that, if we were to allow them in, will ultimately bring healing with them. So we're trying to block out, reduce, or change unpleasant thoughts, emotions, or bodily sensations. But sometimes those unpleasant thoughts, emotions, and bodily sensations are exactly what we need to feel to heal. You can't circumvent healing fully the things that need grieving. These are internal experiences, and they are perceived to be painful or threatening. And they'll include things like a fear of losing control, being embarrassed, physical harm, thoughts and feelings that include shame, guilt, hopelessness, meaningless, separation, all of that stuff. And this avoidance of those types of feelings, it's normal, it's natural. Of course, we're going to try to do that. But it causes the suffering to amplify. It causes the suffering to worsen if our only strategy to deal with those unpleasant feelings is avoidance. And what avoidance can look like in our daily lives, so you can start to recognize if you're doing this, and I've done this, I do this still sometimes, is workaholism or overly busy days. So if you don't have a job, like say you're a stay-at-home person or you work from home, you know, you're independently wealthy and you don't need to work, you might still be cramming your days with meetings and appointments and tasks. So whether it's workaholism or like being overly busy, that's one way that's one way that avoidance shows up in our lives, and we can know that's a telltale sign we might be avoiding something painful, but also something that could be fruitful. Caring for others, ironically, is another way that we can actually be in a place of avoidance. And now I'm not saying don't care for other people, but it's when you care for other people as a fully putting your own needs aside, and caring for others is a coping strategy you're using to not feel what you actually feel. That's avoidance. Drugs and alcohol obviously is a form of avoidance. Traveling even can be a form of avoidance. And isolating, this is the one that's most common, is like isolating and avoiding your triggers. Like that, when this plays out to its extreme, it's things like agoraphobia. But any sort of way of like me avoiding the cookie aisle instead of healing from my issue around food and cookies is a form of isolating. It's not a big deal because you can avoid the cookie aisle, but you can't avoid food altogether. And so in the end, like I'm going to want to face that issue with food, right? So isolating and avoiding triggers is short term. It may work, it may be helpful, but it's short term. So you'll also notice that some of the things on that list are positive things. Travel and caring for others are positive, but it's the motive behind them that either makes them beautiful and exciting or void causing avoidance tactics. We don't need to have fights with ourselves. This culture teaches us to fight everything. And I want to be countercultural on this show. So we don't need to battle depression. You know, this fight culture, battle depression, war on drugs, confront your feelings. But that's a trick of language, that it makes us feel that there is an enemy around every corner and a battlefield behind every meadow. But there isn't. Those battlefields are mostly in our minds. Obviously, I'm not talking to people who literally live in a war-torn area on a battlefield. That's a different story. But even there, a mental state that allows for peace whenever it is present will help you. The present moment is always all we need, even in the midst of a real war. But most wars are an illusion. They are mental wars. What would it be like to befriend your addiction or befriend your trauma, to embrace your hard feelings, to allow your grief to flow? Sometimes even asking that question can feel scary because we've been practiced at avoiding for so long that we don't even understand what it might be like to take a different tactic. But the opposite of avoidance is acceptance. I don't like to use the word confront to talk about our pain, our wounds, and our feelings, because they don't need to be confronted like some mugger in a dark alley. They need to be embraced. They need to be allowed. They need to be integrated, felt fully, loved, accepted, cherished even, because they've formed who we are now. They're part of who we are. They're part of our identity. They can be healed. They can be lessened, but they can't be avoided. When we try to avoid them, they get louder because they want to be heard. They want to be felt. They want to be experienced so they can pass. So a story from my life, basically until I stopped avoiding, I have my own feelings of low self-esteem that have come as a result of growing up with a deadbeat dad who was awful in a lot of ways. And, you know, until I stopped avoiding those feelings of self-esteem and feelings of brokenness, they appeared in every area of my life. I didn't realize that at the time because, oh, I'm doing a great job of avoiding those. But I really wasn't. They were cropping up around me like weeds coming out of the sidewalk cracks of my mentality. I was addicted to people pleasing. That's somewhere that my low self-esteem showed up. I got addicted to drugs at one point. I got addicted to making everything okay for everyone except myself. I was addicted to peacemaking. And you would think in this culture of war everywhere, peacemaking would be a great thing. And peacemaking is a great thing. And I'm happy to have that skill now. But when I was engaging in peacemaking in my family, in my friend groups, in business settings, as a way to avoid my own pain, it might have actually been causing positive outcomes in some of those areas, but it was not causing positive outcomes for me in my life. I wasn't taking care of myself. I was getting more and more and more run down. As I began to face my pain, I was able to question it, to relax with it, to embrace it, and to learn what it had to teach me. And when you do that, that's when healing comes. That's when you start to heal. That's when there's a void caused by the wound, and then the void is widened, it's deepened, it's exacerbated by avoidance. So when you start to heal, the void fills in, the void shrinks down. Now I'm just addicted to Starbucks. And actually that's on its way out too. So you guys can hold me accountable. Hopefully by the time we return for season 2, which starts on Thursday, January 5th, I will be over my addiction to Starbucks. I've been in and out of this addiction for 2.5 years, sometimes stopping for months at a time, sometimes not. But one of the ways that you can embrace a healthy coping strategy instead of an avoidant coping strategy is to ask somebody to hold you accountable. So those of you that are here watching this, hold me accountable. I'm going to come on and I'm going to give you an update in January about where I'm at with my Starbucks addiction. And even telling you this now is giving me hope that I might actually make a larger shift than just holding it in my mind and confronting myself about it all the time. So accountability, that's one strategy. Here are some others. So this is sort of a 6-step process that I want to give you to help you avoid avoidance and increase acceptance in your life. And step 1 is understand what avoidance coping is, which is what we've been talking about a little bit already. So the first step is to understand why it has become a part of your life. So understanding why avoidance coping tends to be self-defeating will help encourage you to be more proactive and effective at managing your stress. If you've ever heard the phrase, what you resist persists, then you have already become sort of accustomed to the basic reasoning why avoidance coping can actually increase anxiety. So we think by avoiding stuff, it's going to take the anxiety away, but it's actually the opposite. When people use this strategy to consciously or unconsciously avoid stuff in their lives that cause them anxiety, they actually create a situation where they need to face it more and where anxiety is amplified. Because now they're not only anxious about the situation, they're anxious about having to hold up the avoidance strategy, because on some level, we all know that that's temporary. So this outcome can be avoided through active coping, but it can be difficult to jump into active coping at first. So, a conflict might bring you anxiety. If you try to avoid conflict by sidestepping it, by avoiding conversations that could contain elements of conflict, it might feel like you're steering clear of the conflict or achieving a low level of stress. But eventually, most of our relationships are going to have conflict with friends, with loved ones, with coworkers. There's going to be disagreements, misunderstandings, and we're going to need to address that stuff. If you avoid having the conversations that are necessary to resolve a conflict, it can snowball and it can bring greater levels of stress to that relationship. In some cases, unresolved conflict can end a relationship. If this happens, you actually might develop an overly anxious stance, and your experience will start to have you believe that conflict ends relationships, which is only true when the conflict goes unresolved. Conflict can strengthen relationships when we accept the conflict, face it, embrace it, allow it, and discuss it. So if you find yourself ending relationships rather than working through them, you're going to likely end up with a lot of broken relationships and a sense that you're not able to make relationships work in the long term. This same pattern that we can see when avoiding conflict in relationships is also true of avoiding conflict in our thinking. When we try to think our way out of bad situations that have gone wrong in the past and we want to avoid in the future, this can leave us trapped in like rumination. And rumination is just a sort of constant way of thinking about anxiety and about the things that cause us anxiety, that causes them to amplify and increases stress and anxiety. So one is understand what avoidance coping is. And that's what avoidance coping is. It's using avoidance as a way to not look at the truth of what you're feeling, thinking, or experiencing in your life. And then step 2 is a self-awareness thing. It's to recognize when you're doing it. So take a minute, take a deep breath, and with me right now, just think of situations where you tend to use avoidance coping. Do you procrastinate? Do you avoid discussing problems or facing issues? Make a note of these. Just jot them down now if something's coming to you, and try to actively notice when you're avoiding something in the future. Once you're able to catch yourself using avoidance behaviors, you'll be able to start working on stopping them in their tracks early and replacing these unhelpful avoidance tactics with more effective active coping strategies, which is step 3. So step 3 is take small steps toward active coaching. I think you guys have heard me talk about turtle steps before, which is something my life coach mentor, Martha Beck, taught us. Turtle steps is basically thinking of a baby step and dividing it by 1,000, and that's a turtle step. So the idea of tackling stressful situations at times can feel insurmountable. Like, that's why taking a first step, a small step, can seem more doable toward making a change in your behavior to head you in the right direction. So if you take one small step every day, that's better than thinking through how to take a big step and then never taking any action at all. So the way that you can know that you've hit on a turtle step, a really slow, small baby step divided by 1,000, is when you imagine yourself taking that step, your reaction in your body is like, of course, that's easy. That's ridiculous. That's so ridiculously easy. I can't imagine not taking that step. That's a turtle step. And then you just take it. And you take that turtle step in the direction of active coping. And you do a little bit each day. You don't even have to do a little bit more each day. Just one turtle step a day is all that's required to get from here all the way to healing. Step 4 is to relax into this. And so I like to say yawn and stretch into relaxation. And this is a technique that I learned in the book, How Enlightenment Changes Your Brain. And Dr. Andrew Newberg and the co-author, whose name I forget, sorry, buddy, talk about basically when you yawn and stretch and like literally like this and like induce a yawn. And if you do that like for 1 minute or 10 times in a row, it actually has this effect of washing your brain in the stress reducing chemicals, because yawning sort of puts all your neurons in this like a wash, and everything comes back to like a reset place. So yawn and stretch. When you're feeling really anxious, just take some time to yawn and stretch. You could just induce 10 times in a row of yawning and see how that changes you, and stretch while you're at it and just see what effect that has on your physiology, because I promise you it's going to be pretty remarkable. And then step 5, use emotional coping strategies instead of just avoidant coping strategies. So some emotional coping strategies are things that you've heard before, like journaling, meditation. They're really highly effective. There's scientific studies to back up how effective certain kinds of writing and certain kinds of meditation are for managing emotional stress. So in addition to finding techniques that calm down your physiology, like yawning and stretching, you want to look for strategies that soothe your emotions, like journaling and meditating. So using these empowering coping strategies can help you feel kind of less threatened by stress and more prepared to face it, instead of feeling the need to escape it and increasing that void that's already there. And step 6, the final step in this process, is relax at the threshold of doom. So what I mean by this is finding a way to become comfortable being uncomfortable. You're going to feel better able to deal with your feelings and the stressors that cause them when you can get used to the idea that there's going to be some discomfort in your life some of the time, maybe much of the time, maybe for a while, all of the time. But the price we pay for being alive is that we go through some suffering. The beauty is most of that suffering is mental. There's clean pain and dirty pain. Dr. Stephen Hayes, the founder of acceptance and commitment therapy, talks about the difference. And clean pain is the pain that happens to you from something objective in your life, like a loved one dies or you break a leg. That's clean pain. And the dirty pain is the pain we add to it with our thinking. Like when we think to ourselves, oh, I'm never going to get a chance to tell that person how I feel and they don't know how I feel. Well, we don't know that. That's just thinking adding to our suffering. Or when we say, this broken leg shouldn't have happened to me. Why me? Life is unfair. That's pain we're creating. We're adding pain to the legitimate pain of our leg breaking with our mind. That's called dirty pain. So becoming comfortable with the uncomfortable can help you to separate clean pain from dirty pain, and it can help you get used to the feelings of suffering that are going to come up on our human journey. When you can sit with these hard feelings, you actually end up having more choices about how you want to face the problems you have, because you won't be making knee-jerk reactions or moving into knee-jerk avoidance tactics and habits. So facing your problems head on actually paradoxically will bring you less anxiety than avoiding your problems, even though that seems counterintuitive. But it takes time, which is why you start with step 3, turtle stepping. So understand avoidance, recognize when you're doing it, take really small steps toward active coping, yawn and stretch into relief and relaxation, use emotional coping strategies like journaling and meditation. And then finally, when all of those things are in place, learn to relax at the threshold of doom. So that just means, and my coach mentor, Martha Beck, called this relaxing at the gates of hell. And so this is basically a way of becoming better acquainted with the idea of sitting with your discomfort, so it can help you realize that in most cases, nothing horrible comes from being uncomfortable. You can learn to handle the hard feelings. You really can. And then that allows them to pass. That allows you to let go. Avoiding them is a pushing of them away. And it actually ends up making you hold on to them more. But letting them in is a way of letting go. You're not letting go of the feeling. You're embracing the feeling by letting go of resistance. And when you let go of resistance, the feeling comes in, you feel it fully, and it goes out. But that feeling it fully part is really yucky. And so we try to avoid that part, but we can't avoid that part for very long. And if we don't avoid that part, we end up on the other side of healing, closer and closer to wholeness, closer and closer to enlightenment. So one technique that's taught in like mindfulness-based stress reduction classes is to sit and meditate next time you feel an itch. So literally, like if you feel an itch, like it's right here right now. I just noticed when I talked about itching. So when you feel an itch, instead of scratching it, sit still, take some deep breaths, and just spend like 3 minutes meditating and seeing if you can become comfortable and relaxed with the itch. Just start. That can be a turtle step. Just allow yourself to feel itchy for a brief period of time. That's a way of training yourself to become comfortable with the uncomfortable. And then after 3 minutes, you can scratch the itch, and that's going to feel like such sweet relief. But in the meantime, it trains you to relax at the threshold of doom. So I want to finish up today's episode by reading to you folks a poem that I wrote this morning, actually, about my addiction to Starbucks. I facilitate a writers group at an arts alliance that I'm a member of. And the prompt I gave the writers had to do with avoidance and coping, because this is something we all tend to fall into around the holiday time, or many people do. The holidays can be a trigger for many people. And so the prompt was, think of an issue that's bothering you and then write about it following this prompt. What would it look like to befriend your current problem? And so, as you know, I chose Starbucks as my issue. And this is my poem written about what it might look like to befriend my current problem with Starbucks. So here goes. An issue that's been bothering me is my addiction to Starbucks iced chai tea latte with coconut milk, 8 pumps of chai, and light ice. Because despite being entirely tired of this habit, I can't seem to stop it. I wake up earlier than I need to, so I have time to drive to this corporate greedy sugar peddler for a drink I don't want, with calories I don't need, to get an effect I don't like. And I'm not really sure why. Sometimes I think it's just an excuse to go on a drive in the morning. And sometimes I think that excuse is just an excuse, covering the mental refuse that is my addiction to chai, and I might never know why. But I digress. What would it look like to befriend this problem? Well, in some ways, it's like we are already best friends. But that might not be as accurate as perhaps we are codependent, toxic lovers who feed off each other. I get sweetness and sugar from the green mermaid, sitting up there all smug in her logo throne on the side of buildings and cups and bags and just fricking everywhere. I actually used the real F-bomb in my poem, but I don't want to get this banned off social media. And she gets money from me, lots of money, over $7 a pop of my money every single time. It's hard to imagine befriending this sugar siren because although I love her, I hate her too. Perhaps what needs befriending is me, myself, my thinking, specifically the part of me that wraps itself in this mermaid's arms for comfort. If she even has arms, I've only ever seen her smug face, but she pulls me back in every time anyway. Befriending the comfort-seeking, sugar-addicted part of me might look like calming down about this. It might look like being internally kinder when I crave that morning jolt of caffeine and corporate nurturing. Could I nurture myself instead? And what would that look like? Perhaps nurturing could be nourishing and I might end up flourishing. But practically, what would that look like? Morning orange juice squeezed from oranges with my electric juicer could work. And internal kindness when the mermaid lures me back in could work too. I don't need to befriend the mermaid. I need to befriend the part of myself I keep calling weak and pathetic and broken. That part needs a friend. That part craves sugar because it lives with my disdain. Can I refrain and reframe? What would my morning routine be like if I didn't have myself as an enemy? And so I'll just leave you to ponder that question. What would your days look like? What would your routines look like if you didn't have yourself as an enemy? If you were able to befriend the things that are bothering you, if you were able to embrace and allow the things that are plaguing you and causing suffering, if you were able to talk to the parts of yourself that need your comfort and need your love and feel your feelings fully. Embrace your grief, be gentle, be self-gentle and self-compassionate this holiday season, and see if you can close a little bit that void that comes from avoiding. So I want to say thank you all so much for tuning in to season 1 of Hot Mess Life Coach and to today's season finale. It is such a blessing for me to do this and to have all of you here with me. And if you know anyone who might benefit from what you heard today, then please share this video or tag them in this post or like it, tweet it, link it, wave at it, whatever it is we do in social media world, TikTok it. And if you want to learn more about me and what I do, you can visit my website at thebrianhogan.com for more information or to apply for coaching. In the meantime, have an awesome rest of the month of December, and I will see you all next month when Hot Mess Life Coach resumes for season 2 and moves to Thursday mornings at 10:30 a.m. Eastern time. So we won't have any more episodes in December. The next episode will be January 5th, season 2, episode 1, 10:30 a.m. Eastern. Mark your calendars. And for now, enjoy December and the rest of 2022. And I will see you in 2023, and I'll see you next year. Until then, be hot, be messy, and be blessed. Much love, everybody. Thank you.